College is a wild ride for young adults, and their mental health often suffers. This podcast addresses the inner battles many college students struggle with. You're listening to Normalize It Forward, where we have raw, unfiltered conversations about young people's biggest mental health problems, how to handle them, and how to achieve a more resilient mind. Time to get rid of those heavy burdens and focus more on self-love and care. Here is your host, Marc Lehman.
My name is Marc Lehman. I am a therapist from Connecticut, and today, through Normalize It Forward, we are meeting with Randy Spelling. Randy, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time. How's the weather out your way today?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's probably high 70s, gonna be low 80s right now. Can't
Nice,
complain. What about
nice,
you?
nice. It's a little warmer than that. It's about 95 today out here. So a little warmer than I would prefer, but that's okay. Indoor and air conditioned, and we're all good. So out this way, we usually get those temperatures a bit in the summertime. So
Right.
yeah. So Randy, let me introduce you a bit, and then I'd love to hear a little bit more about who you are and what you do. Randy is a life coach. I know you're a former actor. And Randy, I have just recently, I have to admit, gotten turned on to your podcast, which I love, by the way.
Oh,
Randy
good.
runs
Yeah,
a podcast with Brian Austin Green and I believe Brian's wife, Sharna Burgess,
yeah,
called
fiance.
Oldish.
Yep.
Fiance,
Mhm.
called Oldish. Would love to hear more about that and other things that you're up to.
Sure. Yeah, Oldish came about. So I've known Brian for I don't know what feels like 30 years,
Okay.
but we've known each other a long, long time. And he called me out of the blue and he said, "Man, I'm watching your videos on Instagram and I'm inspired. Would you do a podcast with me? I have this idea." And it was really, to make an impact, to reach people, to answer questions that at this age, we say that it's not really an age, but it's a season in life that you get to where you start to ask, what is this all about, right? Why am I here? And is this it? Can I make my days better? Can I do something to feel better? A lot of, what I'm sure we're going to talk about today, normalizing things such as having a bad day, being down, is there some form of depression? We're not diagnosing anything, but we're sort of bringing on experts and I'm helping people how I can to have the conversations, to ask the right questions, to also have some fun and entertainment value while doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But to really start to tackle, like, how do I feel better on a daily basis? Because we know that if we feel better on a daily basis, if we get more exercise, if we do some of the things that we know we should be doing and we check those boxes, it adds up to, no matter what age you are, living a better life.
No doubt. No doubt. I couldn't have said it better. And you're absolutely right. I mean, today, what brings us together is the topic of mental health and wellness. And, I think that no matter how old you are, everybody's susceptible, everybody's impacted in some way. And I think our challenge literally every day in our world is what are some of those things that you can do, even small things that you can do to take care and to let yourself feel better and ideally have a better path toward things. So that kind of brings me to my first topic I want to ask you about, self-care,
Okay.
which I know you know a ton about. So I wanted to ask you just your thoughts of, like, when you hear the phrase self-care, what do you think of?
When I hear
Mhm.
self-care, I think of ways to love myself more. I think of setting boundaries because boundaries are a huge form of self-care. I think a lot of people, it's sort of like self-care, luxuriating in a bubble bath or getting a
Mhm.
massage or getting your nails done. Self-care could be anything. Like the other day, for instance, um I came in from work and I jumped into doing dishes and dinner with my family, and there were about four questions coming at me at once,
Mhm.
and at some point my daughter was trying to make this new dish that she wanted to make and the kitchen was a mess, and she said, "Oh, we don't have this ingredient." And I said, "That's okay, I'll go to the store, that was my force. She said, no, you don't have to do it. I said, no, I want to do it. I need a walk. And I walked to the store, and that 4 minute walk was my self-care
Nice.
because I could feel the tensity, the stress rising in me. And I knew that that wouldn't end well. So it's free, it's simple. I walked to the store, but I used that 4 minutes to decompress, to take a look at trees. And I know it sounds like a platitude here, but it's amazing how just getting out of your walls and prompts and voices can connect you to something different. And that's all we need is a brain change, a focus change, a perspective change, and that works wonders.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. As a therapist, I talk a lot about the five senses, and really the way we make sense of our world is through those five senses. So if we shift and we change one of them, that's why listening to music and going for a car ride or a walk, and doing those things can make us feel different, oftentimes better. So you're 100% right. I think self-care comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And some of the little things that you just talked about, I think get overlooked a lot by people. Simply setting those limits. Because, like you, sometimes people will come home and they just simply want to be with their family. They don't want to answer business calls or respond to emails. They want to have some time with their family. And I think in order to do that, you have to go back to setting those limits. And
Absolutely.
it becomes really important.
Yeah.
Really important.
It's so funny when we talk about these self-care moments, right? Whether they're small things of going for a walk. Um, Something I was saying to my daughter the other day is actually just talking, just saying how you
Yeah.
feel is a form of self-care. Saying, you know what, I'm struggling with something right now. That's huge to get
Yeah.
it out of your, and you see
All,
this in your work, right?
all the time.
Writing is important. Talking is important. Getting anything out of your head and onto drawing, painting, writing, just getting it out in some form is so incredibly impactful because otherwise it's like a pinball. It just keeps going round and round and creates this pattern of pressure cooker. And then, we are self-caring, but it's like you can self-care in the wrong way and you can self-care in the right way. And what I mean by that is, reaching for your phone. That we're trying to self-care and self-soothe in that moment. It just might not lead to the feeling that you want. Vices, addiction, things like that. People reach for a drink or they reach
Yep.
for a cigarette or they reach for something. And that, funny enough, is someone trying to practice self-care. Like, I'm stressed. Mark, I'm stressed. I had a hard day. Let me pour myself a cocktail and something,
Yep.
and that takes the edge off. And it's the way that we kind of talk about it. But after a while, when someone's reaching for a drink, and there's no judgment here, but it's like every single day, if you're reaching for a drink to take the edge off, there can be other ways to
Of
do
course.
that. It just becomes habituated.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. No, very well said. And I think that, it's really important, I think, for people to think of it that way. I like how you said that there are things to reach for that are healthy and there are things to reach for that maybe aren't. But I do agree. I think, look, anxiety levels in everybody. I treat young adults. Anxiety levels in young adults are so, so high these days. Way higher, I think, they were than when we were kids. And so it becomes really, really important to do what you said, is to figure out kind of what works best for you. I have some kids on college campuses, they'll throw their earbuds in and they'll go for their walk. Great,
Mm.
clears their head. I have some kids that will smoke pot. Again, like you said, not the greatest option, but they're reaching for something to try to figure out a way to care for themselves. And ultimately, what they're really trying to do is to relieve stress. And
Yeah.
I
So
can't
I
I
want
can't
to
emphasize. Go
I,
ahead.
I want to ask you a
Yeah,
question.
please.
Sorry for interrupting,
No, please.
because I'm seeing this too, and I think everyone is starting to see this explosion of anxiety. Kids these days, it is amazing to hear the conversations, which I'm thankful for in one sense, that there are these conversations happening,
Yep.
right? That it's
Yep.
more mainstream, that kids can say, I'm feeling anxious, or I want to fidget with something, or something's not right. But it's happening so much. It's
Yeah.
so prevalent. What do you think this is from?
It's a great question. question. It's funny. It's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. It's an excellent
We'll ping
question.
pong.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I would answer by adding to it and then answering the question, and that is, kids today, we're similarly aged. Kids today, this generation is growing up with so much more around them, and here's a great example. If you said to most people in their 40s and 50s when you were in high school, did you know of anybody who either tried to hurt themselves or actually completed, taking their own life? They would probably say to you no.
Mhm.
Nowadays, if you say to a kid in their teens that same question, not only did they know somebody, they've got several people on that list.
Yep.
That's just the reality of their world. So they're growing up around a lot more extreme depression, extreme anxiety, extreme intensity. I certainly don't think phones have helped. I think in many ways, phones have really created a lot of intensity for kids that isn't necessary. And quite honestly, I would say to you, right back at what you said earlier, the fact that kids don't interact this way as much as they had when we were younger, I think has created a tremendous amount of stress and strain. I'll tell you how. So if I say to a kid, you're 16, let's talk about going into a store to apply for a job, or you're 19, let's talk about going back to see a professor for office hours, or you're 21, let's talk about networking with someone in business. Kids today will frequently push back at me because they don't like that direct interaction. They'd rather
Right.
Snapchat or text. They like the indirect interaction. And unfortunately, I think that creates a lot of pressure and stress and strain because in life, you just simply need to be able to have that interaction. There's certain things that require it. And when those scenarios come up for kids, it's really, really hard.
So do you think that there's anxiety and angst around having to have those interactions,
Yeah.
and it feels so uncomfortable that they'd rather just not engage at
I see
all?
it all the time. So when kids, here's a great example. Kids go to college, right? You have a random roommate. That's terrifying to some kids.
Yes.
You have all these random people on the hallways. They don't know. They're going from like a group of kids they knew in high school to nobody. That's terrifying to most kids. I mean, believe it or not, Randy, when I treat kids that go to college, they're more worried about that than they are about their classes, you
I'm
know?
not surprised.
Yeah.
I'm really not surprised because you know how the whole introvert
Sure.
extrovert thing became really, really popular? You see
Mhm.
phases, right? It's like, gaslighting, I think in the last couple of years was like all the rage,
Oh,
like
yeah.
narcissism. I start to watch these trends, having done this now for a long time. And introvert, extrovert, empath kind of became a big thing. And it's interesting because this existed always, right? You had people who were more introverted, people who were more
Sure.
extroverted. But I think because of phones, the way that kids are communicating through text and not, picking up the phone and talking, sitting in person. I mean, it blew my mind. I was telling the story the other day. I was talking to a teenager. This must have been 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. And she was showing me Snapchat. I wasn't that familiar with it.
Mhm.
And I was asking these questions, and she said, "Oh, this is how we hang out." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "We'll be at a coffee shop. My friends and I will sit in a
They're on their
semicircle or
phones.
a circle all on Snapchat, and they're snapping, whatever you call it, snapping each other in the
In the
circle."
circle. Wow.
If
Can you imagine?
that isn't mind blowing.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there need, in terms of like normalizing conversations, normalizing the fact that it can feel normal to be anxious about a social situation.
Absolutely.
I
Of
feel anxious
course.
about social situations sometimes. I don't like small
Mhm.
talk. I can connect with people really well. When I'm at a big party, the idea of just like going up to anyone and talking, I don't
Yep.
love. But I thought there was something wrong with me. And so I created a story around it and a narrative. And now I'm at a deficit. Of course, I'm not going to want to step foot at a party for a long time because I was like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm bad or I'm not enough or I'm comparing to other people. So I think just having more conversations like this and being able to say, yes, some people this is easier for, but this is a skill. It takes practice. Other
Absolutely.
people are feeling this way, and to like kick up the dust a little around
Yeah.
this so we can normalize it and say, hey, not only is it normal, there's tools for this.
Right, right. Yeah, and you use the right word, skill. Like, there are a lot of kids out there. I find most kids out there actually have to work at this. It's not a natural thing to do. And I'm just still thinking about that example you gave, where a kid, I picture a kid with like 5 phones at a table. Like, we were sort of groomed as kids to go out and play in the neighborhood and kind of interact. Kids today don't do that. So
Right.
so when they get to a situation like a high school or a college, that is terrifying because they don't have a lot of experience with it. But here's the really cool thing: if they're able to hang in there and give themselves, and sort of practice it, if you will, each day, have a willingness to join a club, join an activity, say hello, even small little things to just, instead of someone walking by you in the hallway, actually say hi, like interact with them. If they
Yeah.
take those small steps, you start to see that kid begin to build that skill set, which is amazing. It's truly amazing.
I have an idea. I think we should do a social experiment and have some sort of, AI is all the big rage, have some sort of tech that pops up emojis. I would love to see the social experiment of kids who feel uncomfortable engaging in real life being able to communicate with emojis, and they can talk. But I wonder, because everything is through text and there's so much emoji and abbreviations, if that were a part of live interaction, would it make it more comfortable because it brings some of the comfort of the screen and the hiding behind in the way of communicating into real life?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting point. I certainly have kids that they have that intensity with their parents. And I'll say sometimes, look, communication's important, even if you have to start with a text. Let's start somewhere,
Yeah.
and that becomes a pathway. So you may be onto something that, there are a lot of kids out there with social anxiety, and just sort of a resistance, if you will, to that connection. You might be onto something. It might be a good link for
Right.
some kids to be able to, to be able to make, because, I will say this, Randy, without something like that, those kids that just walk by a kid in the hallway or literally will sit down next to a kid in the classroom, not say a word,
Mhm.
those kids aren't building that skill set and they remain
Yeah.
unhappy. So
Yeah,
you could sort of see why a lot of young people really struggle with that.
absolutely.
So another interesting topic. I mean, I think people talk about trends. People talk about post COVID, constantly, right? And it's I get it. Obviously, that turned our world upside down, and it really affected things. I mean, obviously, many individuals were sort of in their homes and isolated. Many people lost family members. Many people lost their jobs. I mean, it was obviously a topsy-turvy time for the entire country, world in many cases. And so when you think about wellness, you think about how has wellness changed, from your perspective, since COVID?
Woo, the landscape has changed a lot. I mean, I went from doing a lot of things in person and speaking gigs and whatever to doing mostly online.
Okay.
So I think that has changed. Here's how I see it. It's sort of like if you hear really loud noises, if you're around someone who yells a lot and you don't like it, you might not know how it's affecting you. But after a while, even when there's no yelling anymore, you when you hear a loud noise, your nervous system flinches. Is it going to be someone yelling? Is it something bad? Am I in danger? And I think we all have enough information, some more than others, about trauma, because that seems to be such a hot topic, that it's like there's this trauma response that got activated through COVID. and it hasn't stopped, because once it got activated, then you have, the political landscape, you have all of the polarization in everything, you have wars, you have live direct feeds of people being attacked, murdered, all these things,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that are happening. But the live feeds of seeing it, it's just reactivating the fear and the stress response. So I feel like everyone is walking around like this, but the sun's out and it's just sort of like we go back to life as normal. And there's all of these things happening in the background that is causing so much static. So if we're looking for solutions here, I tell people weekly, there's no shame in turning off the news feed.
Absolutely.
It's so you're not a bad human being for not watching 24/7. Some people are like, well, I'm being silent. No, you're taking care of yourself, because listen, if you're not taking care of yourself, then it's going to be very hard for you to take care of those around you, if you're a parent or if you're a partner or if you have to, do things in the world. That's okay.
Yeah.
We talked about self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Go out and go for a walk. Unplug if you need to. Say no to things more. Say yes to things that fill you up and light you up. We have to prioritize this, as if, I hate to put it like this, but when you have a health crisis, you prioritize things pretty quickly.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And I think, to a degree, I'm not labeling here, I think we all can contend with having a health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Some are more on the spectrum than others. Some are more in dire need. But if we look at it like this, I am having a health crisis right now. What do I need to do to care for myself better? What do I need to do to lower the threshold of stress? Because there is just too much. And even if you can't see it right now, it's not invisible, meaning it doesn't just go off into the ethers. It has a cumulative effect, and you will start seeing health things, unfortunately, in the coming months, years. So we have to lower this threshold of stress, because it's really too high for most people these days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would totally agree. And, and thinking about that, you mentioned the election. As I mentioned before, I treat a lot of kids on college campuses. In the last few months before their semesters ended, there was encampments popping
Yeah.
up all over, college campuses. And boy, talk about, unpredictable. I mean, kids, one kid said to me, I didn't see this on the tour. It's like, I mean, these are scary things that are in their world that they have no control over. And
Right.
to your point, trying to figure out something they do have control over and ways to manage that becomes critical. It just becomes so, so important. Probably a good segue. Let me ask you this. I feel like for many young adults, for many adults, our journey in life, has involved a lot of suggestions and advice from people. And, I know for me, I had several really important mentors along the way that really guided me well. Randy, would you say, is there a piece of advice, if you were talking to young people directly, is there a piece of advice that you'd really want them thinking about and considering?
I mean, there's so much,
Yeah, it's a
but I
big
think
question.
I think talking and expressing yourself cannot be overestimated. It 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 just can't. I mean, daily I have people of all ages, who I'll ask a question. They have probably thought about the answer a million times, but saying it and hearing themselves say it out loud, like we talked about, it gets it out of their head. Once it's out, then they have the ability to go, wait a second, do I want to redigest that or not? Right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
regurgitating something and going, oh, that's what was in there? I
yeah.
don't know if I want to do that. Please don't overestimate underestimate the power of speaking in witness of people. That could be a mentor, that could be a therapist, that could be a coach, that could be friends, family. Friends, family aren't always the best, depending on how supportive and non-neutral or neutral they can be.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it is so vital. Another piece of advice I would say is just from growing older, and yes, I have the podcast called Oldish. Things change by decade. They really, really do. I have two daughters, 13 and 11, and I will tell you that what they go through as a kid and then in middle school and coaching people and watching teens, 20s, 30s, what you care about in high school, what you care about in your 20s really starts to change as you change and grow. And there is a shedding, like snakes and lizards, and they shed their skin. You do shed skin over time. So I hope to instill hope in the fact of waiting, in the idea that if you can get through, if you can navigate through, learn some tools, learn how to regulate yourself, learn how to, navigate things better, things can and will usually do get better if you're just practicing a little awareness.
Yeah.
Right? Putting
Yeah.
your head in the sand and not dealing with anything that you have to deal with yourself. You'll have to deal with it at some point. But just
Absolutely.
practicing a little awareness like we're talking about and moving through, you will get to a different raft and then a different raft. And then all of a sudden you're on an island, and then all of a sudden you're on land, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm building a house. And it goes.
Moving in a good direction. I love that. I love that. That was a tough question I asked, and you handled it well, Randy. I think the power of conversation is so important, and I just find so many young people tend to kind of hold everything up here and in their hearts, and they don't let it out. And what they often find, especially in my office, is when they do, now we can massage it, now we can work with it, now we can talk it through, and we can come up with solutions. And it doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be a coach. It can be, as you mentioned, a family member. It can be a friend. It could be a lot of people. But find your person. Find your person is so, so, so important. So, Randy, let me ask you this, because I don't want to take too much of your time. Part of the conversation with Normalize It Forward is I hope to continue the conversation. I hope to, help normalize health and wellness, mental health and wellness, and really give people an understanding of we are all susceptible. We are all dealing with these things. The more we talk about them, the easier they become. So I often will ask for someone to nominate a friend, a coworker, a relative, someone who you think might be helpful for me to interview next so the conversation can continue. Can I put
Sure.
you on the spot and
Yeah.
ask?
Yeah, I have a friend and colleague, and I just saw something that she posted, so I thought of her. Her name is Sura Kim. Her
Great.
handle is Suraflow, Suraflow. She has been a coach for a long time, and she's really moved into the meditation space. But
Nice.
what I love about the work that she does is it's really approachable. And one thing that I hear literally at least 3 times a week, I know, I should meditate more. Like people always have this idea that, meditation is such a staple of wellness, which it really should be, but the way to approach it feels so daunting. So I
Hmm.
love the work that she's doing because it's really approachable. It makes
Fantastic.
it easy. And yeah, I think it could help a lot of people.
I appreciate it, and I find you tremendously approachable. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
that. I will definitely reach out to her and connect. And Randy, please, while we're on, tell the listeners where can they find you? Where can they find your podcast?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram at Randy
Mhm.
Spelling. I have many offerings and things on my website. It's randyspelling.com.
Perfect.
And the podcast is Oldish. You could listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts. And we have a website where you can get, more footage and different things. It's at oldishpodcast.com. And
Fantastic.
the first episode of season 2 comes out on Monday.
Comes out excellent. I can't wait to see it. I've been watching it recently, so I'm excited to see season 2. And Randy, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your thoughts today. I really, really appreciate it.
You're so
And have
welcome.
yourself a fantastic rest of your
Thank
week.
you. You too. Good to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Take care,
Bye,
Randy.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of Normalize It Forward. May this conversation serve as a reminder that you are never alone in facing your mental health struggles. There are always people who can help. To dive even deeper into our journey of normalizing one of the biggest issues young people face, check out more episodes of the show at youareheard.com. It's UAREHEARD.com. Continue gaining access to the right tools, the best resources, and the most insightful advice to achieve positivity, mindfulness, and genuine happiness.